occurrence of lighthouse in the dark starry night. The appearance of light was necessary. You wandered in the dark forlorn and found your own demons. The darkness of the starry night was more comfortable than nuclear enormously aggressive light. It was cozy whilst light sometimes betrayed itself in interpretation of atomic sunset, of collapse and glow of Armageddon. The light was too expansive, while the darkness was welcoming and comforting. Darkness was fictitious, drawn from personal experience. It announced a time for sleep. Sleeping was comfortable. Falling asleep was dissolution. Though you had insomnia and been slowly disappearing from reality, hiding in the obscurity and covering yourself with it like a starry blanket, you endlessly prepared to sleep and face the visions. The image was ready to reveal. It appeared first as a quick luminous point of light at the end of the tunnel and disappeared. Little later it was a candle placed on the table in my room, lit impartially again for the sake of the balance. But in the little light there was a combination and a presage of change. Whether the stars in the night at the seashore or in the rush of light of the lighthouse, but all of a sudden the lighthouse by the sea, that was so close and definitive. Finally you've got it. In the era of degradation, true belief is the most difficult thing. It's hard to see the majority going dark. It's a situation when you're desperate to stand up to this nonsense, when everything is saturated with fear and hypocrisy, skepticism, negativity and especially cynicism. When you realize that the demons are already nearby, there is a choice to try to live otherwise in spite of these circumstances. It's not even a choice to become a recluse or an opposite of it. It's the only way to revolt. The way it comes to you is a challenge, like a message from outside, like truth, and for the sake of this truth, it's already possible even to move mountains. After all, you don't mind about all the false values of the interaction. You voluntarily, ascetically refuse the benefits offered in exchange for voluntary mutation. You are going your own way, walking the tightrope, and everyone is waiting for you to fall down, to abyss, to laugh out loud. The indiscretion of the victim. He didn't go with us, so he fell down. They called you the man from the past, an endangered kind of human being, they said, the lost of the Mohicans, and only recently you realized that you're unborn yet, you're an upcoming kind, a daydreamer, a harbinger, just as much as loss. Well-respected man closer to his 40s, he told you once, you're using an outdated artistic model. Now there are no outsiders, no underground, no rebel, no victims, no such phenomena. It's all outdated. You're wasting your time. For him it was already a place with everything, when everything is settled down, world of models and machines, of results and statistics, it's steady and down, and it's just his soulless world. That's why you didn't even try to convince him. Not far from the lighthouse, in a beautiful white Gothic garden with gorgeous white tower inside, large pots of red roses bloomed among the greenery. It was difficult to distinguish outlines of the terrain. New forms of space appeared, just coming and fading away. Sometimes it seemed like a garden, sometimes like a cemetery. It didn't matter at all, as usual anthropocentric mode didn't work there. You couldn't prove to yourself existence of yourself as certain kind, as the one who can describe it and see it in all dimensions. There was no such need to do it where there was music, and music came exactly from subtle world, though it was lovely, and it means sensual spirituality, connection with absolute. The sky then became starry and milky infinite, with echo sound of cosmic distance, then boundless, blue and cozy, and the deep sea whirlpool was just moving piece of universe's mind, the imaginary cradle of all relations and forces. At night powerful light was desirable, useful and helpful to let others know of the rocky shore. And while the moonlight touched the graves in the garden, I could soothe my soul by circling and hovering over the ocean, signaling to the ships. With the advent of radio, we began to transmit music to each other just for fun. Sweet 70s and 80s, and your father, who spent his youth back then with radio waves and Morse alphabet, brought perhaps you wanted to join. Borderline personality disorder is a consequence of stigmatization. You didn't know when to speak, used to be alone in your room, as a child just without anyone. Parents, they were also somewhat autistic, with position of obvious discontent towards you. Then you get used to spend time with yourself, having no other examples. All of your communication was reduced to slamming doors. These feelings from inside gave impulses of distress and disorder. You were upset meeting new and old people. You could have met them on the street, and the problem was still the same. You didn't say anything. You tried to communicate, but you felt dissatisfied each time after, not knowing what to talk about in a way that could satisfy you. Silence was as much protection as it was your comfort zone. Insecure, you defended yourself in every case, with not knowing how to live in your body with your precious intense mind. Should have stopped, should have spoken, but you became too attentive, too self-conscious and sensitive, confused, ashamed of your own thoughts and feelings. You sank into despair as if it was too late to change anything, and suddenly your bad experience came to your aid, just as a look outside your language field and cultural code. You saw from the outside your inability, which was covered with a thick layer of everyday dust, so that you couldn't overlook your own closure. It's funny that you called it seclusion, not realizing it was more than that. It was an existential crisis. Ostracism. Your inner conflict was arising at any approach. The front was moving as close as possible, although conditions were global. The reason was simple. All you ever seen was flawed, and all of that you condemned in society when the nearest point was manifested in private. Your attitude stood up for you, gave you some exclusivity, which pushed you in the eyes of people from you, people who've been the same, who could be as loyal to situation, spectacle, society, civilization as not. You weren't ostracized in that way, even around friends with whom you felt all these irregularities and roughness, indifference. Hey, you were a demanding man. You think you were looking at for an opportunity to change your own world, but you begin not only with yourself, but with distant frontiers, largely because you could have seen that others didn't care, and you were worried about this global integrity. For instance, you were touched by global warming in biggest dramatic sense. You were stunned that some people were joking and ridiculing a Swedish teenager. We must call a spade as a spade. You were good at describing feelings, colors, and classifying it, too sensitive to the point of pain, convulsed by the way you felt. You knew the only chance of getting it out was to expose it, to come out, to tell a story, open it up. This was just the case. Someone can be different in any situation, in any relationship. It was heavy and difficult. You built it all over again each time. Your risky space journey, though, was about to end at each moment. Caught in the streak, you realized that you were trying to deceive your own self. There are no legends. We are all the same in the subtle world. We are Atman. We are under something like under their majesty. People used to define it that way. You were irrational and it tormented you as much as inspired you. I think poetry contributed a certain amount of entropy. I had no measure in many ways. You threw myself between white and black, between loud and quiet. You were looking for a balance, therefore. I needed to grasp the essence through extreme points. Pure sense never gives complete answers, only superficial ones. These words by Gilles Deleuze that I remembered quite often. Self-acceptance, the lighthouse keeper. Being a lighthouse keeper is doubtful, not regular an option, a lost idealistic path. These days, ships and sailors don't need it with automatic navigation systems and automatic lighting, but it's a way to feel even retarded in an inverted modern world. Then this is a creative. Perhaps it's a pose, but it's a state. Meanwhile, it's a choice, deliberately picked and perceived for the sake of freedom, knowledge, and true devotion. Views on those who burned themselves throughout life in the name of idealism, who went to conclusions like Giordano Bruno, from madness like Nietzsche, through way beyond and beyond the boundaries, didn't leave me indifferent. I knew they were a minority of those who would disagree with the conventional order organized by usurpers, who didn't want to count with them, who didn't want to receive us, didn't want to invite us, make a stage for us, and they didn't want to admit that we exist at all. And we left it all, in the most of the cases voluntarily, like samurai, like birds, that flew backwards out of this invaded and occupied world. Suicide was for them, in common sense, just a sin. It was disrespect for others, weakness, irresponsibility, but it was often the only way out. And there always will be those for whom it would be ultimately an exit. That can be considered as a salvation tool in the material world theater, where the laws of power, laws of suppression and violence, laws of unlimited overcome and the pain of the heart for the fate of thousands of generations prevail. Despair overcomes, everything is fragile, but at the same time there is something in you that doesn't depend on your efforts. It all remains as given. What is this health issue? What is this health issue, absence or missing? Some nasty seed in which you crashed into your forehead. Whether you're alone, no one else in it hurts. There's something wrong. There is nothing wrong and you want to lay under the blanket. You are so unfit and fragile for this world, for masks, for attempts, for difficulties, for going ahead. Of course, in the end you'll go ahead, eventually, never too late. You're walking serenely somewhere, moving a parallel, observing your own scrapping, but you enjoyed it. You're grateful for it. You like that there are things you can't explain. Without them, there would be neither you, nor your love, nor your thirst. You identified the undefined and kept it for yourself. That's what you like. Something that is not ready for the frame. It can't be passed on to anyone. Except for music, poetry, painting, or film, you can feel the distance and closeness of such phenomena. They tickle your thoughts. They tickle you from the inside. And you know that this is God. This is where you've been, where you're still, and where you'll be. No need to explain it, rather you can only hint of it. A state which warms you whenever you could plunge into something completely heavy, viscous and grey.